Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome you once again on this beautiful night of Ramadan. Alhamdulillah, the 19th of Ramadan has set in, and the month of Ramadan obviously going very, very fast. But at the same time, we continue enjoying the blessings and the beauty of this beautiful month of Ramadan. And we are heading very, very close to the last 10 nights of this great and this noble month of Ramadan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our ibadat. And as we enjoy this beautiful month of Ramadan, we continue focusing on what is happening around the world. And tonight we are focusing on Saudi Arabia. Now, there have been many, many concerns with regard to Saudi Arabia, particularly under Mohammed bin Salman, and particularly with regard to human rights abuses. And this is a matter of serious concern. And tonight we are going to be talking with Na'eem Jeenah, because we're talking about Saudi Arabia purging rivals. Now, since Mohammed bin Salman took over power, we know he's been purging many of his rivals. This includes members of his own family. And the latest, we've learned about several prominent judges that have been arrested on charges of high treason. And human rights groups are saying this resembles previous purges conducted against rivals of the Saudi Crown Prince. So without much ado, we're going across now to be joined by Na'eem Jeenah. Na'eem, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan Kareem to you, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, and to you as well.
Yes, it appears a never-ending saga as far as Mohammed bin Salman is concerned, particularly when it comes to anybody that goes against him, rivals, purging them. And this has happened from day one since he assumed power, or since he became the crown prince.
Yes, I mean, it's clear that even him becoming crown prince was an attempt to upset the kind of status quo in Saudi Arabia and for him to seize power in all kinds of ways. He wasn't due to become the crown prince and to become the next king of Saudi Arabia. There's a pecking order, and he wasn't at the top of that pecking order. But as you say, 2 months, was it 3 months after he became crown prince, and it effectively took over the running of the country. His father has left the country to him to run, and so 3 months after taking over, he started his purges with a number of intellectuals and ulama that were locked up, some of them still in jail, with no charges, no accusations, just locked up. I suppose you could say it was a preemptive strike. Some very famous people like Salman al-Auda, etc. Thereafter, 2 months after that, so that was in September, he became crown prince in June 2017. That was in September 2017. In November 2017 was the one that made big headlines when he locked up a whole lot of particularly rich Saudis in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, basically held them for ransom, and only allowed them to leave after they paid huge amounts of money or signed over huge numbers of their assets. People like Walid bin Talal, etc. It wasn't just a matter of kind of taking revenge, or it wasn't a matter of trying to get money out of these people. It was much more systematic, much more thought through than that. We saw that in that period, what he did was he locked up the ulama that had the potential to be critical of his future actions. So even if they hadn't been yet, they had the potential to be, and so they were locked up and silenced. Then he locked up all these rich people, but a big part of this was to take over virtually all the media operations in Saudi Arabia that were owned by Saudis, like Walid bin Talal, big media operations that now belong to, essentially under the control of Mohammed bin Salman. And then the third area was, so it was economic, it was the media, it was silencing any possible dissent or criticism. And then the fourth area was the security and intelligence services. Previously, the way that the Saudi royal family worked was that, you know, each branch or various branches of the royal family had responsibility for various of these things, whether it was media stuff, whether it was the National Guard, intelligence, the army, etc. What he did in virtually one fell swoop is subjected all of those to his office. So the intelligence services, which historically had been in the Naif family, was taken over by him. The National Guard, which was usually run by another branch of the family, was taken into his office. And so he effectively controlled the military, the security, the intelligence apparatuses of Saudi Arabia without question, completely under his control, as well as big parts of the economy, and virtually all the media that wasn't directly under his control. I mean, even the media that was these other media that he took over, they were pliant media. They were not critical media. They supported the monarchy, they supported Saudi Arabia, and they played the tune of the Saudi monarchy, but that wasn't enough for him. What we're seeing now in this latest thing that happened last week is the attack against the judiciary. And the Saudi judiciary is, of course, by no means an independent judiciary. In fact, what we're seeing again, because this happened in 2017 as well, what we're seeing again is that it's not even sufficient to be loyal to the monarchy, or even loyal to Mohammed bin Salman himself. None of these judges, 9 of them that were arrested last week, none of them have made any critical statement about Mohammed bin Salman or the monarchy. In fact, they have been very useful and effective for his agenda. So one of them, for example, was the one who sentenced the women's rights activist Lujain al-Hathlul. The other was the one who, last month, sentenced 81 people to the death penalty, and they were executed. Most of them, you know, about 80–90% of them were political dissidents. Yet even this wasn't sufficient for him, and he's arrested them. They apparently have been charged with treason, but who knows what happens in Saudi Arabia, and what their future will be is quite unclear. So what he's also doing, apart from locking away dissidents, critics, and potential critics, is creating a kind of environment of fear where even people who are loyal to him don't know whether they will remain in their position the next day or that night. They might be as loyal as possible, but they could still be arrested the next night. They could be moved to another job, etc. A very effective kind of authoritarian rule that he's implementing.
Yes, Na'eem, now in unpacking all that you've said, and you've said so much, and as you mentioned that even those that were loyal to him are not safe, and we know with regard to these judges, we don't know what their fate is going to be, because as you mentioned, we're talking about treason, and not only treason, we're talking high treason, because this could be punishable by death. And basically what he's done, he's basically taken over the entire country, and just understanding, you know, what is his ultimate game? You know, what is he trying to achieve? We've spoken about shuyukh, we've spoken about ulama, we've spoken about, we know what has happened with Jamal Khashoggi as well. Now we are talking about these judges and the agenda, the long-term agenda, you know, of MBS through all these actions, through all these purges and these arrests.
I think the agenda is threefold, Inayet. The first part of it, of course, is Saudi Arabia itself. But Saudi Arabia and his control over Saudi Arabia is really a means to an end. And he's completely merciless. I mean, there are stories, for example, of him for extended periods of time, for a couple of years, keeping his mother and father apart. Because his father, of course, the king, is not always lucid, and he's afraid that his mother might advise the father against the son. So he's completely merciless. But Saudi Arabia, I think, is a means to a bigger end. He wants complete control and complete power over Saudi Arabia and the Saudi royal family, and trim off the other branches of this huge royal family that don't serve in his purposes. That's the first. The second, which we also saw unfolding over the past 5 or 6 years or so, from when he became defense minister before he became crown prince, is his attempt to exert unopposed power in the region. And in this, he's, of course, in some ways has been on and off, supported by the Emiratis, and particularly his counterpart, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed. And so we saw, for example, his war in Yemen, which he expected would be over in a few weeks. It's now years later. We saw his role in Syria, trying to flex his muscles there. We saw his role in Lebanon. I mean, he kidnapped a prime minister, the Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, who again was a loyal supporter of the Saudis. His agenda against Iran, etc. And so it's this hegemonic position that he wants to develop, perhaps for Saudi Arabia itself, or perhaps in partnership with the Emiratis, who though have their own kind of agendas, this hegemonic position in the region. And thirdly, I think that it's not just that. I think that he has, that he believes that he is able to control power globally in various kinds of ways. We saw the manner in which he was able to influence and be influenced by, of course, Donald Trump and his son-in-law Jared Kushner. We saw how after Biden became president of the United States, and it seemed that the American administration might ask a few questions about this or that issue, like the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, that Mohammed bin Salman made quite clear that he's not willing to play this game. He's now dealing with the Russians, refuses to pump more oil, as the Saudis would have done when asked by the Americans before. And so he really does believe, I think, that he has the capacity to exert power at a global level in some kind of way. Just 2 weeks ago, he invested $200 billion in a new company owned by Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law. And many believe that this is that he's hedging his bets, that if Donald Trump becomes president again, this will be a kind of preemptive payoff for favors again from the Trump administration, and of course partly as a reward for what Kushner has done for him in the past. So I think that his objectives are, as I say, threefold, not just limited to Saudi Arabia.
Yes. Now, also looking at him as a person, and it is clear that this man is ruthless. He is brutal, and he doesn't hide the fact as to how ruthless he can be. And even in the case of these judges, these arrests were made publicly. So he is sending a very, very strong message, not only to Saudi society, but to the rest of the world, Na'eem.
Well, of course, there's no real civil society in Saudi Arabia, but he's sending a message to all Saudi citizens, and certainly anyone who has any thought of expressing any kind of dissident opinion, that if you want to do any such thing, you're not safe, and you will pay for it. And it's not only dissidents who are in Saudi Arabia itself. Remember that there's a pending case in the United States at the moment for his attempt to assassinate a former Saudi intelligence chief who is now living in Canada, but passed through the United States. So even dissidents, and there are other cases in Canada and in Europe, etc., of possible assassinations or assassination attempts by him against dissidents. So he's sending a clear message that he will not tolerate dissent, certainly not by Saudis, whether in Saudi Arabia or outside. And dissent doesn't have to mean that you speak against him or you speak against the monarchy. dissent is, it seems, perhaps even just thinking that you might think of speaking against him seems to be sufficient. I mean, these judges seem to be, as loyal as you can get to him. But what went through his mind to have them arrested, one is not sure. He perhaps thought that they might start thinking that they could become a little more independent, and that was sufficient. So he is sending a very strong message, both within Saudi Arabia and globally, or he's trying to, at least. Whether he succeeds, we wait to see.
Yes. Now, if we just draw a comparison to the likes of Saddam Hussein or even Muammar Gaddafi, and we know they were not tolerant of any real political opposition, but both Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi never took it to the level that Mohammed bin Salman has. And we know in the past, we've seen the criticism that have been leveled against people like Saddam Hussein and also Muammar Gaddafi. But for some reason or the other, MBS is treated very, very differently globally.
Well, I'm not sure that I would agree. I have to think about that. That Saddam and Gaddafi didn't take it to that extent. I mean, what Mohammed bin Salman has done since the middle of 2017 until now is move towards creating a system which resembles Saddam's and Gaddafi's, where you have one person completely in charge of everything, and anything he says about anything goes. I mean, that's the two systems that we had in those two countries. And in both countries, we had the situation where they ruled by fear, whether in Libya or in Iraq. Fear was a very important part of their arsenal. And this is certainly what Mohammed bin Salman has been doing and is doing now. But your last point is very pertinent. And that is that the kind of difference in response to those two compared to what he is getting. But let's be clear. I mean, even dictators are, one day a favorite of the big powers in the world and the next day an enemy. This was the case with Saddam. He was, in a sense, a proxy of the West, and particularly the US, when he launched his war against Iran soon after the revolution, in the revolution in 1979, the war in 1980, a war that lasted for about 8 years and lost more than 1 million lives. And he did it because it was what the United States in particular wanted. So he was, he was a wonderful proxy at that time. Even his chemical attacks against Kurdish people, etc., was overlooked, etc., until he overstepped the bounds. And then he became an enemy, and he had to be gotten rid of and overthrown, etc. With Gaddafi, we know that there were sanctions for more than a decade against Libya, quite devastating sanctions. Not even planes could land, all of that. But once he began cooperating with the West, things opened up for him. I mean, he exchanged with them intelligence and information about dissidents, about liberation fighters, etc. And we know the kind of relationship he had with Macron, for example, with Tony Blair. Great relationships, until he also then became a problem, and then it was useful to get rid of him as well. So it's the same kind of playbook. With the Saudi Arabia, of course, the Saudis and the Saudi royal family have been favorites with the West, particularly the United States, for a century. Very close relations, and very, I mean, Saudi Arabia, the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States pre Mohammed bin Salman was actually quite similar to the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel, except that Saudi Arabia doesn't need to get aid from the United States. The aid goes in the other direction. But that kind of political relationship has been that close. But as I said, if Mohammed bin Salman doesn't know the bounds within which he's operating and what the red lines might be for the Americans, well, he might also become then fall out of favor. Right now, he's somewhere in the middle. With the current American administration in particular, with the CIA, with the Pentagon, he's somewhere in the middle. He's not a great friend, as previous kings before his father have been. He's not yet an enemy, although he's making, giving signs that he might be. But if he tips over, then he would become one. So again, we wait and see. I think that our expectations are as unpredictable as he is.
Well, certainly, but also, possibly trading on middle ground as far as the West is concerned. But as far as the Muslim world is concerned, it appears as if this man is untouchable, Na'eem, when talking about Muslim leadership.
Yes, well, yes, to a large extent. I mean, for many people, he is untouchable. Well, I don't think just for the Muslim world. I mean, certainly in the broader Middle East, North Africa region, he seems to be so. But even globally, it seems that he's untouchable. Who right now, no one is making any attempt to bring him into line. We've heard some, muted protests from the CIA, from the Biden White House, but no one is really doing much to bring him into line. So in some ways, he is untouchable. I don't think that he's as smart as his Emirati counterpart, Mohammed bin Zayed, who certainly also thinks that he's untouchable. I think that Mohammed bin Salman will therefore make mistakes that will then make him vulnerable. In the region, he is not vulnerable, but globally, he might be. He's dabbling in power politics between Russia and the United States, for example, which might not turn out very well for him.
Yes, in fact, I'm just looking at a message that has come through from one of our listeners, and this message reads, this tyrant is creating a brain drain in that holy land. He is under intoxication by the United States. What's your comment on this, Na'eem?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what he's intoxicated with. We leave that to him to decide. Look, in terms of the brain drain, I don't think that he's really concerned about the brain drain, about any brain drain. As I said, he locked up intellectuals and ulama. Many have fled the country. Many have been silenced in other kinds of ways. So he doesn't really care, because he does believe that if he needs brains, he can buy them. And certainly American brains would be available to him. His neighbor Mohammed bin Zayed has been very effective over the past few years in buying Israeli brains, and I'm sure that Mohammed bin Salman is not averse to that idea either. In fact, I'm pretty sure that once he becomes king, he will normalize relations with Israel. The only thing stopping him now is that his father is against it. And his father has left everything else to him, it seems, except the issue of Palestine. So yeah, he doesn't really care about how many Saudi dissidents leave the country. They can be sought out and killed, or they can be just forgotten. Anything he needs, he believes that he can buy.
Yes, interesting. As we're talking about Palestine, and I've just seen a message that has come through, and obviously that needs to be verified. But Saudi intelligence arresting a Palestinian who prayed for a Masjid al-Aqsa, and this has basically come hot, fresh off the press, where he's prayed now in the Haram in Makkah for the liberation of Palestine. And once again, as you mentioned, that Mohammed bin Salman, because of his father, at this point in time, possibly holding back with Israel, but we know that he has made statements. He even described the occupying Zionist regime as a potential ally, Na'eem.
Yes, I mean, the relations are there. They just covert, not overt in the way that the Emiratis have done it. And the covertness is because of his father. There were also rumors, I think it was around 2018 or so, that he had visited Tel Aviv in a private jet, of course, and met with Netanyahu at the time, etc. So the relations are there, and he certainly, even though he's not normalizing relations, he wouldn't want to upset the Israelis. He regards the Israelis as allies against particularly Iran. I don't know. I haven't seen the report of the story that you mentioned. But what we do know is that there's a couple of dozen at the moment, Hamas members who have been based in Saudi Arabia, some of whom have been there for decades, who are in prison, one of whom is 80-something years old, and the Saudis are refusing to budge to release them. And their crime is that they are members of Hamas, which in the past was not an issue, but suddenly became an issue. And when it became an issue, they got locked up. Appeals on their behalf have been made not only by Hamas, but by other Palestinian political groups, by other governments in the region, and yet they remain behind bars. So, I wouldn't be surprised by that report. As I say, I haven't seen it, but I wouldn't be surprised to know that it's true.
Yes, and just finally, Na'eem, for a very long time, we have been talking about Saudi Arabia, its position in the Muslim world, and the disservice that Saudi Arabia has done to the cause of Islam and Muslims globally. And we've seen in the past, we've seen many people, we've even seen prominent scholars around the world refusing to condemn Saudi Arabia for what they have been and their actions over a period of time. We see some of it coming to the fore now. We see certain scholars now obviously referring to Mohammed bin Salman in more ways than one. In fact, one actually called him Murtad bin Shaitan. Now, these were scholars that previously were scared to go against the Saudis. But we see civil society, we see people right across the world showing up the Saudis and particularly MBS for who he is. And just looking at it from an Ummah perspective, what do you make, obviously of some of these responses and how people are reacting to what they see happening in Saudi Arabia?
Look, I think it's actually a bit sad, the kind of responses we're getting now from people who are all up in arms about, things like, well, he's allowing wrestling matches and concerts and all of that, as if the things that the Saudis have been doing for the past decades were great. Part of the reason, of course, is that for many of these scholars, what the Saudis have been doing for the past decades has been great. Their suppression of other Islamic voices that they didn't agree with, their demonization of the Shia, sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
The homogenizing of Islam in various parts of the world actually was in line, for many of these types of scholars, was in line with their own theological or ideological understandings. I mean, if you go to various parts of Africa, just as an example, the Saudi influence in many of these parts has been extremely destructive in terms of local culture, in terms of local understanding of Islam, in terms of practice of Islam, etc. Everything from the way people pray to the way people dress has been affected by Saudi attacks and Saudi propaganda and Saudi money. You go to a place like Bosnia, for example. Forget Bosnia. If you go to a place like Mecca and Medina and look at the Saudi influence there, how many of the sites that were present at the time of the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that were still existing up to half a century ago no longer exist, less than half a century ago, no longer exist in Makkah and Medina. This is the theology of the Saudis. And those scholars who have not spoken out against that for the past few decades and are now getting all excited because he's allowing a few concerts to take place, I think that the sense of priority is somewhat misplaced, because here you have a family that has systematically destroyed Islamic culture that has existed over the ages. And I refer to Makkah and Medina, Africa, but other parts of the world, Bosnia, the Balkans, Indonesia, etc. The influence has systematically destroyed what richness of Islamic culture existed in some parts of the world. All of that was, seemingly acceptable. Now that he's having, American singers coming and sing there, that's become a big problem. I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm saying that is a problem. But the problem of the Saudis and their way of promoting, propagating their Islam has been a problem for many decades, and we should have been speaking out about that for many decades. Every time that some historical site in Makkah or Medina was destroyed, we should have had huge protests all over the Muslim world, all over the world. But we were all silent. So, frankly, we deserve it.
Well, Na'eem, Jazakallah khairan so much for that. As always, it's an absolute pleasure engaging and talking with you and also unpacking the developments that, we have been talking about. And we wish you well for the rest of Ramadan, inshallah. And please remember us in your du'as. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khair, and remember me in your du'as as well. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Na'eem Jeenah joining us this evening, alhamdulillah, and yes, a very necessary discussion, and these are the type of discussions that we will also bring you during the month of Ramadan. A lot that is still taking place right across the entire world, and the latest with regard to Saudi Arabia, the purging of rivals of Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and also unpacking the issue surrounding these judges. Several of them were in favor of Mohammed bin Salman. They ruled actually in some of the cases, if one goes into the details as well. But these judges are now being charged with high treason, and human rights groups say that possibly this could possibly even mean a death sentence for these judges, amongst the many other issues. And with that, I'm going to be signing off. Have yourself a wonderful evening, inshallah, and continue enjoying the mercy and the blessings of this beautiful month of Ramadan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.